After the release of Bioshock 2, fans didn't have to wait long for their next fix. A mere 6 months later, the development team at 2K Marin released Minerva's Den, a new story in Rapture, separate from the events of the prior games. A post-launch expansion was new to the Bioshock franchise, but these have long been common practice in the gaming industry. Releasing DLC for an existing title makes smart business sense for the publishers. After all, developing the technology and framework for a new game is a ton of work. Rather than immediately starting over at ground zero, it can be very profitable to extract some extra value from all of that work with a side campaign. If the main game has dedicated fans willing to opt in for more content, the return on investment can be massive. Exact stats are difficult to come by, but I don't think Minerva's Den was a wild success for 2K. It received very little marketing and had a very small adoption rate among Bioshock 2 players. I wish I could get hard numbers, but at least we can look at global achievement stats. These range over a few percentage points depending on platform, but regardless of the specific number and the reliability of such an approach, it's clear that the vast majority of Bioshock 2 players did not take the trip to Minerva's Den. No, Minerva's Den was not a massive success for 2K. In fact, I'm willing to bet that some Bioshock fans are not even aware of its existence. So, if Bioshock 2 has been mostly forgotten by gamers today, you can only imagine how niche Minerva's Den is, and how excited I was to discuss it in this video, because Minerva's Den is 100% worthy of remembrance. It's a fascinating experiment that marks a truly unique entry in the Bioshock franchise. The titular Minerva's Den is the high-technology sector of Rapture, cut off from the rest of the city. The Greco-Roman mythological inspiration behind the name is nothing new for Rapture, but in this particular instance it works so well in conveying the exact air of mystique and containment necessary to capture such an awesome setting. The atmosphere of Rapture is always categorically excellent, but the soft hum of servers interrupted by the occasional violent clanking of machines creates a particularly engrossing soundscape to get lost in. The sector makes logical sense in how all the different divisions are laid out. Everything from McClendon robotics and airtight archives all the way to the central core of Rapture computing. There are only 2 main levels to the campaign, and even though they are pretty meaty, that obviously means the experience is significantly shorter than the prior Bioshock games. Nevertheless, the gameplay experience moment to moment is exactly like that of Bioshock 2, even down to the Little Sister gathering segments and Big Sister fights. So, what kind of changes have been made to the Bioshock experience to accommodate a shorter runtime? That's a good question with some interesting answers. The game starts you fresh, without all of your weapons and plasmids obtained in Bioshock 2 proper. From a story perspective, this makes sense, as you take the role of a new Big Daddy, Subject Sigma, who obviously would not possess Delta's arsenal. But it also makes sense from a design perspective. A sense of progression is essential to stave off the fatigue that is endemic of a flat experience. A game needs to continually open up new options to players to keep the experience fresh, and the player excited to see what's around the next corner. It isn't reasonable for the design team to brainstorm and implement that many new additions to the existing weapon and plasmid pool. That's just outside the scope of the project. So, with that limitation in mind, the game takes away all of your tools from Bioshock 2, and then returns them one at a time. Despite agreeing that this is the best method of progression, I still have to complain that it is frustrating at first. Doubly so if you're jumping into Minerva's Den immediately after the endgame of Bioshock 2. It isn't until you get a couple of weapons returned to your belt that you feel the shackles being removed. Despite the game allowing for this to be a player's first Bioshock experience, we all know the intent is for it to be played after the main game. Therefore, I don't think it would have been detrimental to expand the starting loadout just a bit. As it stands, you begin with naught but your arm drill and the telekinesis plasmid. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, because you really don't have to put up with these restrictions for long at all. The first level of Minerva's Den doles out tools at a breakneck pace. At the risk of sounding hypocritical, I'll even venture to say the progression is too rapid. The pacing feels very rushed in this first level, where you aren't given a chance to play around with a new tool much at all before it is forgotten by another unceremonious unlock. The main Bioshock games have a great relaxed pace to the exploration and world building, as well as the unlocks, and it feels jarring when that is disrupted. The first level is set up in a unique way that brings to mind the enduringly successful Metroidvania formula. You begin in a central hub and will observe a multitude of different paths branching out, all but one of which are inaccessible with the starting equipment. So, you check out the executive wing, and along that path, you'll acquire the hack tool, which, upon returning to the central hub, opens up the path to McClendon Robotics. The game actually has a bit of fun with the player, with 2 fake-outs. At first, you are directed to operations, only to find yourself blocked until you acquire the new gravity well plasmid. Oh well, you are told the plasmid is in airtight archives, but when you go looking there, once again you are faced with a locked door, this one requiring trusty old Electrobolt. It's funny how blatant the gating is here. It feels like some good-natured teasing courtesy of some designer with a sense of humor. You open up these paths one after another, which gives you an immediate goal and allows for a sense of progression in exploration as well as in combat. More importantly, the various locks ensure that players follow the same path through the level, and the story can be uncovered linearly. This is important in the first level because we are just getting introduced to the main players of the story, Charles Milton Porter and Reed Wall. These two once collaborated to create the Thinker, an incredibly sophisticated supercomputer that turned science fiction into reality in Rapture. Fundamental disagreements on the Thinker's purpose drove a wedge between the two.
Porter and I are partners, but he's wasting that machine. In off hours, I've been using it to predict the outcomes of baseball games, and it is incredibly accurate. Apply such equations to Rapture's markets. This thing is the money-making grail. But Porter, I have heard them feeding it recordings of his dead wife. The fool wants to turn the Thinker into a person. I could not imagine a sadder fate for such a perfect machine.
Wall eventually escalated their feud to a breaking point when he faked an audio log recording of Porter pledging fealty to Fontaine. Ryan had Porter sent to Persephone prison for treason, and Wall gained full control over Minerva's den. Over years of self-imposed isolation with his precious machine, he grew increasingly spliced and obsessed with a master predictive equation that could model the very future with complete accuracy. Porter, suddenly returned to the den, enlists Subject Sigma to break through to the Thinker's core to recover control from Wall. In order for all of this setup to make sense, it must be delivered to the player in a strict order, and this is only really possible by also dictating a strict path of progression through the first level.
Operations.
After the elevator ride to Operations, the second level, the game really opens up. Now you are mostly free to head down whatever path you choose because the story beats are more so just expanding the characterization of our two warring engineers. At this point, audio logs and exposition can get mixed up in any order without harming the narrative. It's really freeing to be able to explore organically, but the game does still retain an intended order to the different wings that constitute the level. If you ignore the quest arrow and instead follow your innate curiosity, you'll occasionally be forced to retread ground when the game decides it's time for you to visit an area that you've already cleared. In effect, this actually punishes you for forging your own path when it should be encouraged. It doesn't happen often, the quest arrow doesn't even appear during much of level 2, but these disconnects between the plot and level design do rub me the wrong way. By the time you've gotten to the second level, you will have already regained the majority of Delta's kit from Bioshock 2, and combat can pick up right where it left off. A couple of the lesser plasmids, like Scout, are missing, but are not missed, at least not by me. The combat in Minerva's Den is just as free-form and dynamic as the best encounters in the main game. While the vast majority of enemies and weapons are recycled, there are a couple new additions to slightly expand upon an incredibly solid foundation. One of the first weapons you find in Minerva's Den is the brand new ion laser. This is a straightforward weapon that I'd imagine was very simple to implement. It's essentially an improved chemical thrower, with a more concentrated beam that deals massive damage, rather than spreading status effects. Because the hitbox is so tight, this tests your tracking against the erratic splicer movements in a way the other guns never did. It also includes a burst variant that is such a departure from its base use that it could almost be split off into another weapon entirely. It's super satisfying to release the blast after a long charge up, but you aren't given many chances to experience this rush because ammo is inexplicably hard to come by. The aforementioned Gravity Well plasmid is also a new addition, and I can't say it's as enjoyable. The plasmid does have excellent utility. One use can easily incapacitate an entire room of splicers. It's probably too good, and definitely intrudes on the strengths of the other plasmid options. Besides the question of proper plasmid balancing, I really hate the way it shines a light on Bioshock's sloppy physics with its ragdoll effect. This is something I never mentioned in my discussions of the other games, but it's always been present, just never to this degree. The plasmid in use simply looks bad, and makes the game look buggy. So even if it's clearly the most powerful plasmid, you'll rarely find me equipping Gravity Well. In addition to one new weapon and one new plasmid, Minerva's Den adds one new enemy type as well, the Lancer. This Big Daddy variant uses the ion laser and is extremely deadly. I really enjoyed the challenge of fighting them, and their blinding flash attack is a unique mechanic for players to figure out. Don't forget to avert your eyes. I want to get back to the story of Minerva's Den, but first we have to endure yet another disappointing climactic fight. The atmosphere leading up to the Thinker's core is fantastic, but the fight against Wall leaves much to be desired. Bioshock has done these type of fights before with a single spongy boss character and many other normal enemies attempting to overwhelm you, and they have never really worked. This one is a healthy challenge, but doesn't feel satisfying narratively or in its gameplay. As Sigma, you take down Wall. He wasn't a very strong or memorable villain, even when compared to the side antagonists like Grace or Gil. As it turns out, the game's story doesn't hinge on its villain at all, so let's forget all about Reed and soak in the brilliance of Minerva's Den's final moments.
Confirming user's genetic identity. Genetic identity confirmed. Alpha series. Subject Sigma. Former identity. Charles Milton Porter.
Welcome back, Milton.
System. Ending personality duplication. Subject Charles Milton Porter.
That signature Bioshock twist is back, baby. After wresting control of the Thinker from Wall, it is revealed that Subject Sigma is in fact Charles Milton Porter. So who was that on the radio? None other than the Thinker running a personality simulation to coax the actual Porter, now a brainwashed Big Daddy, to reclaim his invention, and his identity. This twist draws similarities to System Shock 2's Shodan reveal, an AI impersonating a friendly character over your radio. It's not that far off from the Atlas reveal in Bioshock 1 either. But the focus of the twist isn't on Radio Porter's identity, but on actual Porter's identity, and the fact that you are playing as him the entire time. Charles Milton Porter is a fantastic character, defined by tragedy, the death of his beloved wife Pearl, and the resulting suffering. The pathos and sheer weariness put into his lines make one of my absolute favorite vocal performances.
I believe I'm done feeding audio recordings and personal anecdotes to the Thinker. I am set to test the personality duplication function. Target personality, Pearl Porter. Thinker, are you ready?
Yes, Milton.
Starting test. Hello, Pearl.
Hello, Milton.
How have you been?
Just wonderful, Milton. I've missed you, though. It's been so long.
Pearl, No, this isn't right. It isn't her. Thinker, stop the test.
But what's the matter, Milton?
Oh, God.
Don't you still love me?
Oh, God, I said end function, Thinker. Now! It's over.
What I mean to say is that I was totally invested in his story prior to this twist. and suddenly being placed into his shoes, or rather diving suit, is gut-wrenching. After this shocking revelation, the game slows down to allow us to reflect on Porter's story in his office. This is such a fantastic moment where all distractions are removed and we can just soak in the vocal and environmental storytelling. No combat, no looting, not even a HUD. Apparently, the team had to fight to include this walking simulator closure, but they were absolutely right to do so. I'm not usually attracted to such a stripped-down gameplay experience, a style that some Minerva's Den alums would later come to dominate under the banner of Fulbright Games, but this is a perfect implementation. With the help of Tannenbaum, Porter is able to heal from his Big Daddy condition. More importantly, he was able to come to terms with the loss of his beloved.
I lived through the Blitz, Pearl, and the fall of Rapture. They took my memory, my voice, everything that made me a man, but nothing ever scared me so much as saying goodbye. I wanted to save you. I couldn't resist trying to bring you back the only way I knew how. But you didn't want that. I know it now, and I think I'm finally ready to let you go your way. I stand here with the sun on my face, and it's almost like I can feel you smiling. Goodbye, Pearl. I love you more than I've got words for. Milton.
Bioshock 2's story added an element of sentimentality to the series, and Minerva's Den proves without a shadow of a doubt that such an approach can elevate the experience exponentially. And that's Minerva's Den, a tight gameplay experience with a fantastic story to boot. Even with stopping to smell the roses, you can see everything it has to offer in 4 or 5 hours. I've read a lot of think pieces that declare Minerva's Den as the greatest entry in the Bioshock series, but I won't be that hyperbolic. I would hesitate to even call it an essential experience, but it is absolutely well worth playing and studying. Minerva's Den was a successful experiment in condensing an immersive sim down to its essentials to fit a more contained story and tighter budget. There is no fat to the game, but also no compromises. Minerva's Den feels exactly as long as it needed to be to tell its story and not leave the player unsatisfied with lack of content. If I described you earlier when I postulated that many Bioshock fans probably missed out on the little game that could, what are you waiting for?